My name is Marcia Robinson, and we are recording an oral history with Sondra Schear Ross as part of the Sweet MUMories Oral History Project to mark the 50th anniversary of the Miami University Middletown, Ohio campus. This interview is taking place on September 3rd, 2016 at Johnston Hall. Professor Ross, do I have your consent to proceed with this interview?
Yes.
Thank you. So I understand that you are one of the first English faculty here. Can you tell us the story of how you came to the campus?
I had been teaching at Walnut Hills in Cincinnati, which is where I met my husband, and he was an attorney here, and so we moved here. And I had never even heard of this campus. Of course, I'd heard of Miami University, but I didn't know anything about this particular campus. And I found out about it and I applied, and it took a while because, again, there were a lot of kinks. And it was very close to the time that the campus was opening that I found out that I even had the job. And that's how it happened.
How long did you teach here?
I was here 3 semesters. And I tell the girls and the middle-aged women that I lost my job when I delivered my first child, which was in January of '68. The campus opened in August of '66, right?
Mm-hmm. Was that standard practice in America?
I don't know. I really don't know. I didn't fight for the job, okay? And I am a fighter. I did not fight for the job because of what I told you about the political situation that was here. It was so uncomfortable that I was, in that regard, that I felt I was just as well off not to pursue any technical things about remaining in the job. So there was no maternity leave. There was no compensation or dispensation for anyone, as far as I knew, any woman who delivered a child right in the middle of the academic year.
So you taught for 3 semesters.
Right.
What topic did you teach?
Well, I taught English. I guess it was 111. The begin. I don't know what it was called. Introductory. I guess it was introductory English. So it was composition, and it was literature.
What was it like for the students to have this campus open up in Middletown?
I think that again, this is a slightly uncomfortable, but it was marvelous. Most of the students were very, very local. And I'm not even aware, I don't recall if there were any that traveled any distance, maybe Franklin, they came from Franklin, but I don't know. But again, I had come from Walnut Hills High School, which was so academically advanced, and I had taught 9th and 10th grade English. I was shocked, beyond shocked, when I realized the level of I don't know how to say it, these students. They were, my 9th graders at Walnut Hills wrote better and spoke better and had read way more than these entering freshmen. Now, I know that over the years that has changed tremendously. That's one of the things I've kept up with because I wanted to. I found it so startling that these kids were freshmen in college and they seemed so very, very ill-prepared. They were eager, they were good, they were kind, they were ambitious. They wanted to learn. I'm not exactly sure that they knew that they had limitations, which was good, but it was shocking. It really was. And I know that the improvements have been steady and have been tremendous. And I know that the campus here has done just a superb job. So that was good, but that was just the beginning. That was the very first season.
So it requires special teaching skills then to be a faculty
Well, but I had
here.
taught in Manhattan.
How does that compare?
And I had taught 5th and 6th graders in a school that had children of United Nations people and who had children from the gutter, from the streets. And as a matter of fact, a prostitution ring was broken up across the street from my school, where they were using the girls from my school as prostitutes, 12 and 13 years old. It was terrible. But the school was tracked, so there were 3 different tracks. So the UN kids or the professional kids didn't really interact at all. They hardly ever saw the other kids on the other 2 tracks. And it was a lesson that was so profound for me. So this was easy, coming here and teaching these wonderful, open, eager students who basically had a lot of advantages that the students that I had taught in New York did not. The school where I taught, again, it was in a good neighborhood, but the school where I taught, a policeman had either shot somebody or was shot that set off riots in Manhattan. So nothing coming here was shocking. It was a piece of cake. It really was. It was quite easy. Anyway, I had one student in New York who used to come and he had welts on his neck and on his arms because his mother used to beat him with a belt. But I knew that kid absolutely, positively made it out. I knew he did. And so that's always been a hopeful thing for me, but a lot of the kids didn't. And it's what's happening in the inner cities everywhere, so.
Do you think other faculty here had the same passion to make up for the deficits because the students were ready?
I think the faculty here was stupendous. They worked so hard. They were really happy to have these jobs. Now, where the path that I had taken, I didn't know if I was happy to have the job. I kind of felt it was a step down in the sense that I loved Walnut Hills and I yearned to be there, but it just couldn't work. But these people were brought from all over the country. One of my favorite teachers had been at the University of Colorado, one of my favorite faculty members. So they just came from all over and they were really happy to be here. They were happy to have this job.
What's so special about it?
I don't know. I don't know whether that was a period of time when jobs were, maybe the market was constricting. I don't really know. Maybe being part of Miami University, which is a great university, maybe they thought maybe they'd start here and go over there, and some of them were splitting their time. I never did, but some of them were. I don't know. But I never felt that they had taken any kind of demotion or any step backward being here. I really admired them.
So if you could tell me any cases of students whose lives changed in the time that you were here because of the classes that they took, maybe with you, or maybe you saw so much growth with them. Again, we can't do names, but if you can say
well, you just
what
saw
their
my
obstacles
one former
were.
student, and as I kept bumping to her in town, she would always rave about the classes. And really over the years, until fairly recently, a lot of the students would come up to me whom I would not even necessarily remember, and they would introduce themselves and they would tell me how much they enjoyed the classes and how much they'd gotten from it and how much they appreciated the work that we'd done. And that was always very satisfying, because what else is there? I mean, when you teach, you want to impact on the lives of your students. And I have been fortunate over the years to absolutely know that I did impact on the lives of many, many students.
Were there any structural barriers that some students could not overcome?
Well, this Q test was one of them. I mean, that was a big barrier. And I don't know how many students we lost because of that. It was a very critical thing. I think as far as the curriculum was concerned, setting aside the Q test, I think they did okay. I do not remember reducing my standards for these students. I was tough, but I think they felt that I was fair.
What was the campus like that first day, that first week? Do you remember
Well,
the
this was
environment?
the only building besides the library, and it was small. I mean, it just felt small. But everything that needed to be done for the students and the faculty was accomplished in this building. So. And little did I know that I would grow up to buy Logan Johnson's house. We lived in it until about 2 months ago. We bought it from his estate.
Wow. Do you remember Logan Johnson?
I do.
Can you tell us about him?
He was an extremely elegant man, very tall, very erect, a gorgeous head of white hair, very... he was not humble. I was going to say arrogant. I'm not going to say arrogant, but he had great presence. He knew who he was. He knew he'd achieved a lot in his life, which he had. He did a tremendous amount for Middletown. I mean, when I moved here, I think I was led to believe that he was the main mover in getting this campus here. I could be wrong, but that was the impression that I got, that he had really, of course, not just single-handedly, but that he was the big shaker and mover. The two original buildings were this building and the library, as I recall.
I think so.
And then the next building that went up was the Dave Finkelman Auditorium. And Dave Finkelman was related to us through marriage. His sister's name is Reggie Finkelman. And Reggie Finkelman and her husband, H.O., donated that sculpture that's out in the, if it's still here, the tall one with the swirly circles.
With water.
Huh?
Yes, it is.
So they donated that when the campus opened. So we have a lot of connections. And Gladys Finkelman, who was Dave's widow, was the one who, oh good, yes, and Logan, okay, it was the one who, she did at the time donate quite a sum of money, and Logan Johnson was the one who shepherded it through. Logan Johnson was the one, I think, who identified her and went to her and persuaded her, if I'm right, to consider making this stupendous donation. And she loved every minute of it. She loved every minute of it, didn't she?
That's right.
She
Yes,
did.
I would
She
think
really?
so.
Yeah, he was here. He was, my husband may have had something to do with part of the, I don't know, did you have anything to do with the legal aspects of it? Okay,
No,
okay.
no.
Are there any other people from that core group that you personally knew and you can talk to us about their personality? Or maybe Evelyn Day, I don't know if you know about her.
I knew that she was, wasn't she Verity's secretary?
Yes, could you tell us about Evelyn?
How much do you know about Evelyn Day? You remember Evelyn Day, Verity's?
I remember the name,
She was a tiny woman, as I recall.
Evelyn.
Was she the one that wore the hats? I think she wore hats a lot, but
But I don't remember
no.
anything.
Yeah,
about
Evelyn Day. I do remember her, but I don't know her very well.
Did you have recollections of Mr. Bennett or anybody else?
Well, he's the one that hired me, Gene Bennett.
Okay, what was the interview like?
It was, what was the interview like? Well, it was not warm and fuzzy, I can tell you that, but I guess you would call it professional. He was getting his land legs too. I don't know where he came from, but I mean, what I mean is I don't know what his previous position was or where it was. His wife eventually became a good friend of ours, and his daughters babysat for us.
So,
They lived in our neighborhood, actually, about a block away.
Is the sense of family because the neighborhood was so close, or because people worked so closely together? Could you talk about
I'm
that
not
sense
sure
of
I
community?
understand your question.
Some people talk about a sense of family among the administration and the faculty and the staff. But your interview is telling us that it's also about being neighbors.
Right, but my closest friend and my dear, dear, wonderful friend was Claire Easton. She was my mentor, actually. We were just talking about her yesterday. She was an extraordinary human being, and I miss her with all my heart.
What was she like?
She was feisty, and she was smart, and she was international. She was originally from Trinidad, and she was part Chinese. And her brother eventually became the prime minister of Trinidad. And she was very close to her family in Trinidad, and she was very proud of Trinidad, but she had married an American, a man named David Easton, who was a librarian, and he was the librarian at Armco. So there's that connection with Logan and Armco and all that Armco did for the campus. And maybe that's how they ended up here. I don't know. I'm not exactly sure, because I believe she was on the campus when it opened. I know she was, because she ran the Artist and Lecture Series. And I became very involved in the Artist and Lecture Series, and actually as a result of that, I developed the major part of my career, which had nothing to do with teaching here or anything, but which I could talk about if you wanted. But Claire had this way of identifying artists, performers, and groups that were just about to make it big. They were just on the cusp, and she would get them here for a pittance. I mean, she could drive a bargain like you couldn't believe. And none of us really appreciated it, because she did it in such an effortless way. And so many of the top, now she only dealt in the classics. She didn't do, maybe a little jazz, but no pop, no, I don't know. I mean, I wish I could tell you some of the groups, some of the performers. If I scrolled back in my memory, I probably could think of some. And the list is endless. The list is absolutely endless of the extraordinary events and performers that woman brought here. She was a beautiful human being. I loved her with all my heart, and I miss her so much.
You're the first person to mention that she was married.
She had 3 children.
No one's mentioned this. Could you please tell us this part about Claire?
Well, she was married to an extremely, what's the word I want to use? He was kind of unprepossessing, but once you got to know him, he was a very profound person, very, very beautifully educated, magnificently educated. And but she was so talkative and so volatile, and it's like so many situations where in a room, David, her husband, would not fade into the background, but Claire always was in the foreground. And there was always something spirited going on when she was around. But they have 3 children and 2 daughters and a son. And at the end of her life, it was her son who took over the care of her. She got Alzheimer's. She had Alzheimer's. I believe that's what it was. And it was an awful thing to see. There were some people here in town who were much better friends to her at the end of her life than I was, for which I feel guilty, but I've never, anyway, some very, very good people. And then she moved to, I can't remember what city it is in Illinois, where Drew, that was her son's name, was Drew. And her daughters were, I'm not sure I can
She was a
Jeannie.
great cook.
Oh yes, she was a stupendous cook. And if she invited us to come over, I tell you, we moved heaven and earth to get there. Her oldest daughter was named Jeannie, and her middle daughter, we went to both her weddings. And we were invited to Drew's wedding, but we couldn't go. What was the middle daughter's name? I'll think of it in a minute. But the girls are very accomplished, and she was a great mother, but she combined my first child was born in 68, January, but her kids, she had 3 children by then. So she combined having she had a big title. She was either vice president or, I can't remember what her title was, but she was next in line to Jean Bennett, I think. I'm not sure, but I think I'm right. And so she had the children, and then she had this career, and then she had an extremely active life in the community. She was a member of a lot of clubs, and they were in a cooking club, and just all kinds of things. And then her husband took a job, believe it or not, in Saudi Arabia, running a library or creating a library in Saudi Arabia, or a library system, something like that. And so she stayed here, and he was there, and then the children kind of shuttled back and forth, and there was an American school there. So the children were in school there, or they came back here, or whatever. Wow. He did that for years. They lived distance and, how many thousands of miles apart, which again was very unique in those years.
You said you had another career that was an outgrowth of being here?
Yes. What happened was she brought in, this is such a wonderful story. I love this story. I don't know if you have time for it. But she brought in this pianist named Lauren Hollander, a male. And my husband and I knew about Lauren Hollander because we subscribed to the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra, and he appeared with the CSO every year. And we just became really big fans of his. So when I found out that he was coming in, I was no longer on the faculty. And I called her up and I said, Claire, I want to be invited to the faculty reception for Lauren Hollander. And there's this big silence on the other end of the line. And I said, Claire, I was on the Town and County Committee, I did this, I did that, I want to come. She said, Sondra, I used up all my money bringing him in. We're not having a reception. I don't have any money for it. So I said, okay, I'll have the reception if I don't have to invite every single muckety-muck from everywhere around Miami University, because I had a reception for like 200 people from Miami a year or so prior to that, and I just didn't want any part of that. So at any rate, she said, you can do whatever you want, but if you want to have 12 people, that's fine. It was a Thursday night, I remember, because I called my friends, one friend in Richmond, Indiana, several in Cincinnati. I said, get your butts in gear, get in your car, get up here, because we all knew Lauren, and we all loved his music. We just loved it. So they came, they piled into their cars, and they came. It was, from Dayton and stuff. It was wonderful. So then Claire cooked a meal for Lauren, and because most of these performers do not eat before they perform, and then they're starving afterwards. So he went into the kitchen, and she had this beautiful meal for him. Was that the meal when she did the sushi? I can't remember, because he was just saying yesterday that the first time we'd ever had sushi was when Claire made it. We'd never even heard of it. So anyway, then he came out, and he was very sociable. And we had a a beautiful piano. And so I don't think he played, I can't remember if he played, but anyway, he kept staying and staying and staying. And it was getting to be 11 o'clock, 11:30. People had already begun to
I think
leave.
he stayed, if my memory is correct, till about 5 o'clock in the morning.
Meanwhile, my husband is a morning person. He's, starting to nod off. I'm a night person. I was loving it. It was just so great. So I don't know how long you lasted. And finally, I didn't want the evening to end, but I finally said, aren't you getting tired? I mean, why are you still staying here? Well, I'm having a wonderful time. And he was being picked up at 7 in the morning. This was already by that time about 5 in the morning, to be taken to the airport, which meant he'd not slept at all. So he had this big briefcase about, I don't know about this big. So I said, you got to tell me what's in the briefcase, because I've only ever seen him, carrying this big briefcase. So he says, there's a sweaty shirt, the shirt he wore in the performance that he'd given here as part of the Artist and Lecture Series. And then there was a copy of the Talmud. Now, I don't know whether you know what the Talmud is, but I said, you're Jewish? He said, yes. I said, well, we're Jewish. I mean, he doesn't have a Jewish name. Lauren Hollander is far from being a Jewish name. And so that developed a whole community of interest. Then it turns out he has 2 sons. We have 3 sons. They're about the same ages, and we talked about all that. So anyway, then we made a promise to each other that if he appeared within 50 miles of us, we would come to his performances. And so we did for many years. We came, and then one day he said to me, why don't you bring me back into Middletown and I'll do a residency there? So I said, what's a residency? He said, well, I'll come and I'll teach and I'll play with orchestras and I'll coach and the whole thing. Well, it just turned out to be a moment in my life that was perfect. My youngest was 5 years old. He was old enough to know his address and his phone number and stuff. And I was ready for a change, and so I just decided to do it. My husband thought I was crazy. He kept saying, I don't know, he just thought I was crazy. But Claire supported me all the way. That's why I call her my mentor. She threw in money to bring him in. We got Miami and Oxford to throw in some money, so he appeared with the Oxford, Miami Oxford Orchestra. The city threw in money, and we had a big event downtown with him as the centerpiece. And I remember we were walking into the city building. You know the city building, so it's what I call a La Scala effect. And we had decided, in order to get people there for the opening night gala of the residency, that we should have art shows and we should have performances. And so the kids would come and they'd bring their parents and we'd get a crowd. So anyway, we're walking up the promenade, Lauren and I and Fred, and he says to me, what is this? Where are we going? What are we doing? And he said, who's going to be there? There was a baby grand piano on the floor down there. And I said, I don't know who's going to be there. I don't know how many people are going to be there. And we tried to push open the door. We couldn't. The place was jammed. It was jammed to the rafters. And we couldn't get in the door. We had to shove people aside in order to get in. And then people were lined all the way on all of the balconies. And the children's artwork was all around. And Claire was there in her glory. And it was spectacular. Now, interestingly enough, politically, the Middletown Symphony Orchestra did not support it. Everybody else did. And the banks, the businesses did not support it. The way I raised the money was from the piano teachers who loved him. So anyhow, afterwards, some of the women from the Middletown Symphony Orchestra women's group said, how come we didn't have Lauren, be part of our performances? Well, you didn't want to do it because you thought we were taking money from you. And so anyhow, 2 things happened. Well, actually 3 things happened. His New York publicist called me, and she was hysterical. This was shortly before his appearances were beginning. And the appearances were April 17th of 79, because I remember it was 2 days after my 40th birthday. So anyhow, I get this call from her, Audrey Michaels. You remember her? And she's screaming, she's a New Yorker, into the phone. We have to cancel, we have to move. It's not going to work. We're not going to get any media attention for this. And I kept saying, why? What do you mean? She said, well, this is not Miami, Florida. This is Miami of Ohio. I said, yeah, you're right. It's Miami of Ohio. Don't worry. We're going to have a good crowd. Everything will be fine. She was hysterical. She could not get it, because it's a typical New Yorker. She couldn't get it into her head. So anyway, the story of it was picked up by the services, you know, the news services. The story of Lauren's appearance in Middletown, Ohio, appeared in the Gulf of Oman press in the Middle East. And Life magazine heard about it and came in and we recreated the residency for Life magazine. We recreated it. Now, one of the things I forgot to tell you that he did was that he appeared at Lebanon Correctional Institute. And after Life magazine came in and we recreated it for them, Mr. Rogers came in. He had heard about it. And Mr. Rogers, we recreated the Lebanon Correctional Institute performance for Mr. Rogers, which I have on videotape somewhere. I probably should, maybe it might be useful to donate that. I don't know if I could find it. When I moved, what did I do with my water? Well, anyhow. So at any rate, so when Life magazine came in, it was so amazing, because the writer said, well, I want to go meet the president of the bank, and I want to meet, you know, the head of the insurance companies. And so I fine, you know, go to Armco. Armco gave us no money. The banks gave us no money. Sure, nobody did. So he's sitting across from, I can't remember anyway, what his name was, the president of First National Bank. And so the writer says to him, well, what did you do for this residency that brought Life magazine in here? And this guy is squirming around, you know, and he says, well, we didn't do anything. What do you mean you didn't do anything? What an extraordinary thing for a small town like this to do with this major artist. He said, well, we didn't think it was going to be very successful. We thought she was taking money away from the legitimate arts organization, so we didn't do anything. And I raised $20,000 to bring him in. I had never raised a cent of money in my life for anything. $20,000 in 1979 was a lot of money. And he made 17 appearances in 4 days, including with the Middletown High School Orchestra, which changed their lives. It was a beautiful thing.
One of the stories that came from the correspondence to create this university said that they wanted an institution that would raise the culture level of Middletown. Do you think that happened?
Oh, absolutely, because of Claire. Absolutely, and because Jean Bennett supported her, because the Oxford campus supported her in this. She had such a limited budget. She stretched that budget. I don't know how she did it. She was a miracle worker. But we had advantages here that were just extraordinary. And actually, the first residency that I did with her support was not the last one, because the second one I did was with a dance company. She co-sponsored it. And I continued. Each artist that I would bring in, she would also present here, and she would find money to throw into the pot. And these were all major, internationally known performers. And it was because of her support that we could do this. I cannot say enough about that woman.
You've said more than many people have.
It's too bad.
They wanted to, but you filled in the details they did not have. And I appreciate that, and I thank you for it. My next question concerns people who've graduated from here. Have you seen any examples of how the Middletown has been affected by the graduates of this school? Again, without stating names.
Yeah, well, you met the one young woman. Actually, I can't say that I have, because when I left here, it wasn't that I went home and sat in front of the TV. I mean, I had 3 young children, and I always worked. I always had a career. And then I had my husband, and we had an active social life. We've subscribed to the Playhouse in the Park for 50 years, symphony and this and that. I mean, we were very, very busy. So I did not really keep up with any of the faculty, except my one friend, the one who had come, Elizabeth Krakowski. Maybe you've heard her name. She was one of my very closest friends, and Claire Easton. Those were the 2 that I kept up with, but none of the students.
But lifetime friendships did occur.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Both those women are dead, and it's heartbreaking, but it's true.
What else would you like to share?
Well, let me think. I have a funny story about Logan Johnson.
Okay.
Would you like to hear it? So he was very powerful, and he built a house that's, we like to call it a fortress. It was very well built. It was built in 42, and when he died, he was living in the house, and it was on the market for, how long was the house on the market? 2 years maybe before his son sold it to us? Well, anyway, but his wife had been ill, quite ill, and he had put an elevator in the house. So imagine, we bought the house in 68, so I don't know how old the elevator was. So originally we just considered it to be a nuisance because we had young children. But of course, more recently, it was wonderful. It's old, but it was worked and it was wonderful. So anyway, one of the stories, so we were always very proud of the house, and it was beautifully designed and wonderfully built, and my husband knew the builder, and but there were these 2 gorgeous maples in the front yard. This is the funny story. So anyhow, the story we heard was that the roots of these gorgeous, huge matching maples were coming out of the ground, and he didn't like it. So he was so powerful, he called the Interior Department in Washington, and they sent somebody out who stayed supposedly for 2 weeks to try to figure out why the roots of those trees were coming out of the ground. And so by the time we bought the house, they were not coming out of the ground. And he eventually ended up, I think, wasn't it Reagan's last year of office? I think Logan was either the Commerce Secretary or I think it was the Commerce Secretary. Do you have that down somewhere?
I do not, but Rod Nimst likely does.
Oh, Rob, what's his
Rod
name?
Nimst.
Oh, yeah, Rod. I know Rod. He'll know which, but I think it was the last year.
Okay.
But this preceded that. He was very powerful. Another thing that was kind of sad was when the day we moved in, he had only one child, and who was a grown man, and he was arrogant. But at any rate, there was a big plastic bag on the curb, and it had split open. And I don't know whether dogs had gotten to it or what. It was designated as trash, and spilled out all over the whole driveway were birthday cards and congratulatory cards from some famous people. And his son had so little regard for that it was just, so we picked it all up and we just, rebagged it. But ever since then, I told my children, when we go, just throw it all in a dumpster, don't put it on the curb. It was a very compelling memory that You know, this was such a great man in Middletown, and to have his personal effects strewn all over the street, it was awful.
I see why people were so excited about you coming to talk to us.
Oh, really?
You've provided an element we've not had.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
And I hope I get to interview you some more in the future.
Okay.
But for now, we have a schedule that you need to keep.
Okay, very good.
May I discontinue this interview? Do I have your permission to stop recording?
Oh, yes, certainly.
Okay.
Yeah, if you're finished.
I think we are for today.
Okay,
Thank you.
very good.